The winter sky over Germany was the color of metal, cold, silent, unforgiving. Below it, a line of exhausted prisoners shuffled through snow, boots splitting at the seams, breath fogging the air. Among them walked a man named Jack Turner, once a mechanic with the U.S. 8th Air Force. His hands that once tuned engines and sealed fuel lines, now shook from hunger. And yet, that night, in a dark corner of a prisoner camp, those same trembling hands would change the fate of hundreds of airmen. No one knew it then. No one could, because what Jack was about to do was forbidden. The camp was called Stalag 12D, hidden deep in Bavaria. It wasn't a death camp, at least not officially, but men died there all the same. They died of frostbite, disease, and the slow erosion of hope. Barbed wire groaned under the wind. The smell of wet straw and rusted tin filled every breath. At dawn, guards stomped through the snow, boots crunching over frozen mud. Their voices barked in German, sharp and distant, as if they belonged to another species. Jack had been here for 6 months. Before that, he'd worked at Thorpe Abbott's, a U.S. bomber base in England. He knew every inch of the B-17 flying fortress, its fuel system, its engines, its stubborn heart of aluminum and steel. When his bomber group was shot down over Bremen, Jack wasn't in the air. He'd been in the back of a truck, hauling spare propellers. The truck took a direct hit. He woke up half buried in mud, surrounded by fire and twisted metal. Captured. Now, every morning, he woke to the same sound, the moan of engines overhead. B-17s. His birds. Still flying, still fighting. He'd look up through the barbed wire, tracing their contrails as they stretched across the sky, thin, perfect scars over the land that held him prisoner. And every time, a thought came. Do they know I'm still here? The guards didn't like him much. He spoke little German, but he understood enough to know when they mocked him. Der Amerikaner Mechaniker, they called him. The American mechanic. Sometimes, they threw him scraps of metal or tools and laughed. Fix this, Mechaniker. He would, because hands like his didn't know how to stop fixing things. But that day, the day everything changed, began like any other. The camp siren howled. Prisoners lined up for roll call. The wind sliced through their thin uniforms. The sky hung low, heavy with snow. And then, far off, came a sound that didn't belong, the sputter of an aircraft engine. One, then another. A crippled B-17, limping eastward, black smoke trailing behind it. Jack froze. He could see it, barely above the tree line, losing altitude fast. Too far. Too low. The guards watched too, rifles ready. The bomber vanished beyond the ridge. No explosion came. Just silence. And something in Jack's chest broke open. He whispered, God help them. But God, it seemed, was busy elsewhere. That night, the guard dragged in 3 new prisoners, survivors from that same down B-17. Frozen, bleeding, half alive. One of them looked up at Jack through swollen eyes. Mechanic from Thorpe Abbott's? Jack nodded slowly. The man smiled, a cracked, painful smile. Good. Then maybe we ain't done yet. And that's when it started. That's when the forbidden idea took shape. The days blurred together. Snow. Hunger. Roll call. Work. Sleep. But inside Barak 8, something unusual began to stir. Whispers. Sketches. Small pieces of stolen metal hidden under the floorboards. Jack had learned something from the new prisoners. Their B-17 hadn't gone down because of enemy fire. It had gone down because of fuel starvation. A design flaw. One Jack had fought to fix before his capture. The B-17's fuel lines froze in the cold of high altitude. Once frozen, engines starved, even when tanks were full. The solution was simple and forbidden by U.S. protocol. Reroute the return pressure valves and install a bypass vent that allowed warm air from the engine bay to cycle through the fuel manifold. It worked. Jack had done it once before, secretly, on a squadron mate's plane. That bomber came home with 2 engines dead and 1 tank shot to hell. Still, it made it back. Now, in a German POW camp surrounded by the enemy, Jack thought, what if I could tell them? What if I could save them from here? But how? No letters went out uncensored. No radio. No messenger. Any communication with Allied forces was punishable by execution. Still, there were rumors. A guard named Kurt Weiss, a mechanic before the war, sometimes lingered by the work shed when the prisoners repaired farm tools for the Germans. He wasn't cruel like the others. He spoke softly, smoked constantly, and sometimes shared a crust of bread. One day, Jack approached him quietly. "You worked on engines," Jack said. Kurt looked up cautious. "Yeah, Mercedes, before the war." Jack pointed to a rusted tractor engine in the corner. "Fuel pumps airlocked. Watch." He cracked open a valve, twisted 2 lines, and pressed the ignition. The engine coughed, then roared. Kurt's eyes widened. "You are good." Jack smiled faintly. "I used to keep B-17s alive." Silence. Then Kurt said, "Flying fortresses." He knew the name. Something unspoken passed between them. Not friendship, but respect. Over the next weeks, Kurt began leaving him small favors. A tool here, a bolt there. And sometimes, when the guards weren't watching, he'd ask questions. "How many engines does she have?" "4. And each his own fuel line?" Jack nodded. "Why you smile when planes fly over?" Jack hesitated. "Because those sounds mean home's still fighting." Kurt didn't reply. He just nodded and walked away. But something had shifted. That night, Jack began sketching. On the back of old bread rations, on bits of newspaper, on wood shavings. He drew the bypass valve system, labeled it carefully in both English and broken German. It wasn't just a drawing. It was a message. He hid it in a small tin, wrapped in cloth, and handed it to Kurt the next morning. "If this ever finds the right hands," Jack said softly, "it could save lives." Kurt frowned. "This is forbidden." Jack nodded. "So is mercy." Weeks passed, then months. The war dragged on. Prisoners died. Snow melted into mud. Jack had almost forgotten the sketch. Until one morning, Kurt didn't show up for work detail. Word spread through the camp. Weiss was transferred. Some said he'd been caught helping prisoners. Some said he'd simply disappeared. Jack's hope froze like the winter ground. Until, 3 weeks later, a British officer in the next barrack whispered something impossible. "Did you hear? Bombers are making it back with holes you could drive a truck through. Something about a new fix in the fuel lines." Jack blinked. "What did you say?" "They say some ground crews started modifying the fuel bypasses, unofficially. Planes that use a dropout now limp home." Jack's chest felt tight. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He just sat down, hands shaking, staring at the dirt. Somewhere out there, maybe his message had gotten through. Maybe Kurt Weiss had risked everything to pass it on. That night, Jack wrote his first diary entry in months. They call it forbidden. But what's forbidden about saving lives? Maybe one day, someone will understand that engines aren't the only things that need warmth. One night, the camp came under Allied bombing. Sirens wailed. Guards shouted. Prisoners dove into trenches. Explosions shook the ground like a heartbeat from hell. In the chaos, a section of the perimeter fence collapsed. Men ran, some screaming, some silent. Jack didn't move. He looked up at the sky, lit with fire and tracer rounds, and whispered, "They're close now." Then he heard it, a familiar rumble overhead. For engines. Uneven. Wounded. A B-17. He stood, trembling. The plane banked hard, smoke trailing, trying to climb. And then it stabilized. It was flying straight. Through burning skies, it kept going west. Jack sank to his knees in the snow. "They made it," he whispered. "They finally made it."